Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Somali Yacht Club, The Space, out April 22nd on Season of Mist. The album has 6 tracks, 45 minutes in length, and this is the band's third full-length studio album. They are a Ukrainian atmospheric stoner rock band. As far as the design goes, this album has an incredible sense of continuity from song to song, and because of that, I don't think you can listen to this album in any other format but giving yourself the 45 minutes that you need to sit down and press play on that first song and go all the way through it. You're not going to get the essence of the record. The record is not going to give up all of its secrets unless you give it its time, unless you process the album in the way in which was created, in the way in which was designed. An album that even when you feel like you're not moving, you're still going somewhere. You may not be going somewhere physically, but mentally you're drifting through the overall atmosphere that permeates throughout this entire record. A record that has 2 cornerstones when it comes to its design: the opening track and the closing track, the 2 bookends. Silver is the opening track, a great opening track because it opens up the book, but it doesn't open the book completely. It doesn't give up all of its secrets, but it gives you glimpses in terms of sound and atmosphere and even how the vocal approach is going to work throughout the entire record, which is important because it kind of sets the bar, but not necessarily defines it. And then you have Momentum, the closing track, over 12 minutes in length, the longest song on the album, an absolute epic song. It brings everything, all the experiences, all the sounds, all the atmospheres, everything that this album has comes together or comes into a conclusion in Momentum. And then they add some new elements into that mix, allowing the song to be very creative, I would even say experimental at times, because it just goes where no other song on this album had gone before, while still using a lot of the same elements, a lot of the same formats, a lot of the same mechanisms. Incredible track. A track that also doesn't give up everything that it has at first glance. You have to go through this album a few times in order to really appreciate not just what this song gives within its own realm, but what it gives to the overall feel of this album. Phenomenal way of constructing an album that has this sort of uniform atmosphere throughout its entire existence. When it comes to sound, the album has 3 prongs. You get the atmospheric side, you get the sludge side, and you get the stoner side. The beauty of the record is that all 3 can coexist perfectly well, allowing some songs to have more of one, less of the other, but the atmosphere is the one that seems to be the main uniform or the main calling card of the entire record. It really binds the album. It's really the glue that holds it all together. Then you have more stoner, more sludge here and there. You have variations of those 2, and that's what gives the album the movement that it needs, and that's what gives the album some of the ebbs and flows. It's not a dynamic record. It's not a roller coaster ride of an album, but there is movement there, even though sometimes you may not really notice it. One of the beauties of the soundscape is that these 3 elements coexist in their own space, but then they're able to merge and you can still feel exactly what's driving which. Sometimes when you have albums that are deeply atmospheric, the elements themselves, the guitars, the drums, the vocals, the bass, they get lost a little bit in what is happening. The elements start to become more as one, and there's not as much segregation between them. So it's hard to define exactly what's creating what or what's driving what. On this album, you don't have that problem. Even in the sludgier moments, even in the most stoner moments of this album sound-wise, you can still hear the bass, you can still hear the drums, you can hear the guitars, you can see exactly what they're doing individually and the impact that they're having into one another. That is also something that defines the overall experience of this record. It allows the album on one hand to be complex but feel very simple in the approach that it gives, in the essence that it offers to the listener, making the overall playability of the record a lot better, making the album also more engaging. It's easier to connect with it. Now, the bass on this record is definitely one of my favorite elements. I love the sound. I love how much it grounds the record. It creates some shapes. It helps create borders. When you have that atmosphere, when you have that soundscape that feels very thin at times, that feels almost like a fragrance, it's easy to lose track of where it starts and where it ends because it just dissipates. The bass on this record really helps create some shapes, some borders that controls a little bit of that movement, that makes the album less volatile, that makes the album more contained within its own environment. And I just love the tone, I just love the presence, I love how much I got to listen to it and the incredible impact that it had in the overall experience. The guitars are phenomenal on this album as well. These to me are the two cornerstones of the soundscape, the bass and guitars. The guitars are really interesting because one moment you're listening to a song and you feel like you're going through a more stoner approach in terms of what the guitars have to offer, in terms of the essence of the guitars and even the atmosphere that they create, and suddenly there's this dip and it moves into a more of a sludge sound that just really drags the listener through to that portion of the track, that portion of the album. The ability to move from one to the other, not from track to track, but within tracks themselves, it's really something to be said. It's not an easy way to approach a record. It's not easy to blend these styles and morph these guitar elements within the same single song without allowing the track to feel broken, or without allowing the track to feel segregated, like becoming pieces that were just thrown in together. This album never feels that way. There always seems to be a purpose to everything that's put forward. And even though the movements may change, the elements may morph, the purpose that they have is always there and is always very clear, which makes the listener feel more welcome into that experience, into that volatility that exists. But the guitars, the movement that they have is absolutely phenomenal. Definitely something that allowed me to gravitate towards this album a lot more, because I was just really engaged with what they had to offer, the different experiences, the different textures, really important throughout this entire record. The vocals on this album are more or less another atmospheric element. They don't really feel like they're there as a vocal approach, as a traditional vocal approach, I would say. It feels almost serene in terms of how they present themselves. They're there, but if they're not there, you don't really miss them. And when they're there, they don't feel like vocals. They feel like just another instrument. They have this incredible way of blending, of morphing in with everything else that surrounds them. And like I said, you almost forget about them at times when the songs go through stretches that have no vocals at all. And then when they're there, they feel like they're adding texture, they're adding a different flavor, but they're not having that lyrical impact that you would expect from an album that would be perhaps a little bit more vocally driven. This album is not the case. The vocals are definitely another instrument, but another instrument that adds to the atmosphere of the album. All around, this is a very incredible album in terms of the construction, in terms of the sound, in terms of the atmosphere, and how all of these elements are able to blend with one another. The only thing about this record is that you really require the 45-minute length to be able to appreciate the album in its full essence. If you try to break this record down, favorite songs, or listen to a song here and a song there, you're gonna lose everything that the album has. This album is not built in that format, is not built in that way. This record requires you to go from song number 1 to song number 6 in that order for you to be able to lose yourself and then find yourself at the end of the journey. As far as favorite songs are concerned, outside of the singles, Obscurum is an incredible track. It's a calm track. It's a song that simmers. The guitars are very versatile in this song, and a lot of the movement that the tracks have come from that versatility of the guitars. They stay grounded, but they also expand themselves. They have this contracting, expanding and contracting movement that stays very uniform throughout the entire track. The vocals are subtle. Something you could be said about this song, something that could be said about the entire record. They're never in the forefront. They're just another layer in the overall design of the soundscape of the album. It's a mist that blends in all the elements as one single element, while still allowing you to enjoy and appreciate the individuality that they have on their own. It's a mesmerizing song with mesmerizing sound. Next you have Gold, a track that feels more light. It feels not as dark as Obscurum, for example. It's a song that allows you to feel differently towards it because it almost has more of an upbeat, at least how it starts. This is an interesting track because it starts off very light-hearted, I would say. It has a nice sound, a nice experience, but it feels like the sun is shining in. It doesn't have that dark cloak. It's also not as atmospheric. Perhaps because of that, it feels a lot more light-hearted in terms of how it comes across. Then as you get into the last third of the song, this track completely changes. It starts to go down a hallway that takes you towards that pit of darkness that is kind of the calling card of the entire album. And once that starts to happen, once that darkness starts to appear, you'll also see the atmosphere of the song increasing. The track starts to become less different from the rest of the album, and it starts to blend in more and more what the overall record is all about. An interesting aspect, an interesting way of constructing a song and taking you from pure light into pure darkness. Last but not least, Echo of Direction. I love the bass. I gotta say, this track has an incredible bass sound, an incredible bass tone that really jumps out from the get-go. I also love the melody that the overall track has. It brings in also a heavier sound, not all the time, but it gives you jolts. First of all, it dulls you. It dulls you with the way that it takes you in terms of the stoner and sludge elements that the sound have. You feel like you're just kind of sinking into this track, and you're going at the flow of the current. You're going wherever the track is taking you. You're not forcing anything, but the track is doing all the work for you. You almost feel like you're a little bit out of control in terms of the direction that the track is taking. Then you have these jolts of heaviness that come with a little bit more of a sludge sound, a little bit more of aggressive, a little bit more rugged, definitely heavier, that really changes how you perceive the track. It almost wakes you up. It gives you this jolt of energy that you realize that the track now has a different direction, it has a different purpose. This doesn't make the song a roller coaster ride because they don't happen frequently. The movements between one and the other are really spread apart. So you don't have this sense of going up and down constantly. It's more dulling you on one hand and then jolting you on the other, which makes the track feel almost like a mini synopsis of what this record is all about. This is a record that, for the most part, dulls your senses, but it also jolts you and wakes you up at the right time for you to see exactly what's surrounding you. So this track has a very interesting approach in terms of construction and sound that kind of matches the overall idea of the record itself. This is it, Somali Yacht Club, The Space, out April 22nd on Season of Mist. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.